Welcome to Inform TV. I'm Alan Repke, Alexandria, Minnesota. Today we're going to take a look at the Talent Society. I'm going to analyze an op-ed piece written by New York Times columnist, contributing editor, whatever you want to call him, David Brooks. And I think it's an interesting look at our society. Now, I don't agree with much of what he says, but his Talent Society is something we as common citizens should really be thinking about, and we should see that it's a topic that's brought to the attention of society and our elected officials, because the talents he is talking about are really over-empowerment of individuals today. And I think that's really the topic that, or the perspective I want to bring into David Brooks's work here. And we at Inform TV, you know, we're here to enlighten you and energize you. So when you're done listening to our program, you're truly informed on a knowledgeable, factual basis on what's really going on. And with that, I'll flick our logo out of the way and encourage you all to read this article yourself. Don't just take my word for it, and think about what David is really saying here. Just Google the Talent Society or New York Times. It's free online, and take a look at what he's talking about. But I'm going to do a more analytical view of what David is really saying. The Talent Society. Now, he starts the article in a unique way by saying we're living in the middle of an amazing era of individualism. And I could not agree with him more on his opening line. We have empowered people incredibly. Not so much you and I, but the true power people. And I think the masters of CNBC Business Report is a prime example of too much individualism. Really what David is talking about is his group of fashionable people. He's not relating to you and I. He puts on in his article that he's talking about opportunities for all of us. And I may have some opportunities here on Inform TV if I can get this thing off the ground and start enlightening people on what's really going on, not just the fashionable people's view of what's going on, because I've lived at the very top of society and the very bottom, which gives me a unique insight in what's really going on. Now, when he talks about the amazing individualism, I think the Morning Joe show of the elitists of our society, the special people, and I enjoy some of the things that Morning Joe talks about, the Squawk Box and the CNBC people as well, and I talked about these masters of the marketplace. Individualism, it's mind-boggling what power our government, because we have failed, and has given to these masters of the universe that control markets by speculating on margin, control things by, just as we saw this week, Kraft Foods buying the Pringles brand. How is that competition? We are talking about the power of individuals like David is talking about. There's absolutely no reason that Kraft Food should be able to buy Pringles other than that empowers them to be more profitable and more dominant in the marketplace. It doesn't bring in more competition, people, which capitalism and a democracy of a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, they don't need a margin this wide. They can deal with a much smaller margin, but when they get to the point where they control everything, these few individuals, these few corporations, it's just mind-boggling. And when we look at what David is really talking about, the talent of society, this is about the autocrats, the system where government and society are controlled by a noble, privileged class. In fact, the reality, people, if we look what's going on in our society right now, we're reverting back to what our forefathers left in Europe. It's just mind-bogglingly powerful people, this aristocracy that's developing in this country. And it's developing because individuals are just mind-bogglingly empowered. And there is the other thing that he talks about that affects us all, especially in this election cycle, is a few generations ago, it was considered shameful for people to have children unless they were married. But now suddenly we find out that 41% of the births are to mothers that are not married. Just think of that. And the interesting part about this and family is what we saw in the Minnesota press here this past week with my ELCA Lutheran Church, the Minneapolis Synod, which is by far the biggest synod of the ELCA, the big powerful Lutheran Church in Minnesota, and they decided to take no position on marriage. And I, as a member of that group, was just outraged. Of course, I've been outraged when they allowed gay and lesbian people into the pulpit. I don't think that's appropriate, especially for our younger people to wonder about their sexuality and what the Bible teaches. And yet, under individualism, anything goes. And yet, at the same time, what is happening this past week was suddenly Santorum in the Republican Party becoming more powerful and possibly the nominee of the Republican Party, and his incredible far-right beliefs on family and the abortion issue and birth control to the point where there's no reason or they're talking that young women who are sexually active should not have access to birth control, to see that there is true family planning, so that what we've done in the past, this article refers to back in the 50s when people felt that people should be married. And I certainly believe that, and I think most of you believe that, but the facts point that society has got away from that. And I think the Republican Party, who like to champion themselves as the family party since the Roe versus Wade decision on abortion has come about, instead of helping the family, they've put this massive guilt trip on young women and young couples, and we're basically destroying the family structure. And I challenge our Republicans to look at the numbers. Your belief on family and religion suddenly isn't delivering. And when the Republicans get together for their county conventions and their congressional district conventions with this new redistricting plan, I think they have to look at themselves and say, what are we doing here when we don't support the night after pill for a society that's sexually active? What are we going to do? And I'm going to soon do a program on the child support, the monster called child support, and what that has unraveled in our society. But we'll get back to David's article here from the standpoint of what's really going on here. And he talks about that single people are becoming prevalent, and I, unfortunately, being divorced, am single. And that is very common, unfortunately, in our society as well. And he looks at a few generations ago, people were involved with the majority political parties. And yet what's going on in the Republican Party, what's going on in the Democratic Party with this pipeline issue of now they're talking of $5 gasoline, and they don't want to put a pipeline, a 36-inch pipeline in the ground that's proven technology. In fact, you can go to the Cenex store, and I encourage you to get off the freeway and go north into Alexandria to the Cenex store there and look at that incredible piece of pipe I've got there, incredibly strong to safely bring crude oil from the Bakken, North Dakota oil field, as well as oil sands in Canada, to address energy costs. And yet we have two political parties. The Democrats seem to have adopted this incredible belief of environmentalism that doesn't face reality, because now we're trucking oil out of these oil fields. We're railing oil out of these oil fields rather than using pipelines. And we're in a situation where he talks about the political parties. And now the Republicans with this abortion thing, most people believe sound family planning, sound birth control, safe sexual practices are the way to go. But the extremists on the right, the Republicans, I don't know where these people are coming from, what righteous view they seem to have adopted for themselves, when we in a democracy, when it comes to our religious faith as well as our teaching for our family. Years ago, when I was raised a Republican as a young kid, when we started debating issues in school, I remember going home and asking my parents, why are we Republicans and some of our neighbors are Democrats? Why are we Republicans? And I remember my dad saying, we as Republicans believe that government should be out of our lives as much as possible, and that when we go home in life, whether our neighbors who are Catholic or Wisconsin Synod Lutheran or Methodist or whatever, can close their door and give their views on life and faith and family. And when they go out in the world, when they go to a public school, they discuss the issues, debate the issues, but at the same time respect their fellow man. And the thing that he told me that caught my attention, both my mother and dad, is the fact that we must keep our government or any particular group from forcing their views down society's throats. And obviously that was the reason for separating church and faith, church and government. The separation of church and state is what I'm getting at. And at the same time, in David's article, he talks about the large corporations. We no longer have large corporations, and for the elitists, that doesn't matter. But for the average person that's watching this program or looking at his article, it's incredibly devastating to our society. One of the reasons we do not have corporations here, government and these individuals who, the Steve Jobs that just died, were so empowered. He was called a great American, yet he had 1 million jobs making cell phones and computers in Asia. And they compared him to Henry Ford and Edison. And I thought it was just outrageous to do this. Those great Americans not only developed great products just like Steve Jobs did, but they made sure that those jobs were here in the United States. Where under individualism, no person is a greater example to out-of-control talent society than Steve Jobs, the late Steve Jobs. When he has come in and dominated the cell phone business, the unique part of the computer industry, and he did it by U.S. patents and trademarks and copyright, and yet at the same time, in exchange for that, he didn't have to bring 1 million jobs into the country. He was able to take those jobs overseas. Yet no one's talking about these so-called talented people who did not take care of their fellow man. They were strictly individuals. They were looking out for themselves. In fact, we looked at his cell phones. most of these handsets are hugely subsidized by the phone carriers. How do we allow that? We're a society that says we don't want farm subsidies or subsidies to the oil companies, yet we let probably the most powerful subsidy ever that Steve Jobs used of forcing our phone carriers to subsidize his handsets so he could sell these gadgets to his talented society people, these elitists that David Brooks is talking about. Then he goes on to talking about a few generations ago, teenagers went steady. A few generations ago, most people belonged to a major religious denomination. Today, the fastest growing religious category is unaffiliated. The reality is, part of it is because how religion has handled themselves, especially in my case, my despicable ELCA Lutheran Church, who is suddenly dominated, I believe, by a pope and 65 clerics, all disguised as bishops. And yet, we look at a society here where he's talked about unaffiliated. When you really go online and look at various things and people, in fact, the dating game, you go to Match.com. I'm single. I don't belong there, but I've snooped around there to see what was striking to me as a Christian. The dominating force of women today talking about faith, they say they're spiritual. And that's really unaffiliated with religion for the most part, of any organized religion. And the importance of organized religion is when he talks about a talented society. How do we pass on the proven power of faith without a structured religious establishment in our lives, whatever that may be, whether you choose to be a member of the Covenant Church, the Lutheran Church, or the various groups of Lutheran Church, or the Catholic Church. The reality, unless we have some structure, unless we let individualism go when it comes to spirit, we devolve back to Native Americans that were uneducated about the history of mankind. And he also talks about the groupies, that people are a mess. They're looking at networking relationships. The reality is these individuals have taken care of their own financial matters and not concerned about anybody else. And he talks about how marriage and all these things go forward, but he doesn't have an understanding of what the average person is going through, especially what that low income are going through under this society of incredible power for a few individuals. And the best example of it that David should be looking at is 47 million people on food stamps. Their incomes are so out of touch with the individualism that he's writing about, or the CNBC that people that I talked about. And when we look at people living alone and people in society that are struggling with living alone, the mental capacity, the stresses of job, the stresses of family, the stresses of an unstructured life, of what do they turn to? The reality is this great individual world that he's talking about, for the most part, most of those people are frustrated with the individual situation they find themselves in today. They're not empowered by it as David is talking about it. They're frustrated with it. In fact, what proves that? The mass amount of people that are on antidepressants today and seeing psychiatric help, or probably should be. This is not a situation when we look at the mass amount of people. Now, I can't remember right offhand what the numbers are, but you, like myself, have heard them. It's just incredible the amount of people that are on medication to handle anxieties or the stresses of the day. And I would say the fact that they have a few powerful people telling them what to do, and this is especially true in the global marketplace, where we have empowered people like Steve Jobs with patents, copyrights, and trademarks to take the jobs somewhere else. You know, I talked about here where I was involved in the sugar industry and putting sound sugar policy together. What happened there? We made sure that the sugar you were getting, about 80 to 85% of it came from American factories, American workers, American farms. And yet at the same time, we allowed for new low-calorie sweeteners. We allowed that corn sweetener could come in and compete with us, and but we just didn't want unfair dumping. Yet we have in our society these people that talk about individualism, these people that the Steve Jobs of the world, they are totally protected from that. Yet those people stand at the podium or on the stage and talk about the free marketplace, when in reality, the free market is not in play here, rather the power of government with copyrights, trademarks, patents that have made individuals incredibly powerful. And when we look at our society today, when we have a group of people that we have the haves and have-nots, and I would disagree with society, what you're hearing about the 1%. We're probably in a society today that's 1/3 is living the American dream and 2/3 are just wondering where they're going to go. With wages, real wage buying power coming down, with the power of corporations like the Steve Jobs to move the jobs overseas, to see that these individuals are empowered by government, yet stand at the podium and talk how government should be lessened, when in reality they are incredibly empowered by government. And he closes the article, these trends are not going to reverse themselves. And what I'm saying in election year and a time here in Minnesota when redistricting is taking place is the fact that they must revert back to some structure in our lives. We are a nation that puts on every dollar bill, in God we trust. And the greatness of America is the fact that we did have the policy and the power to look at faith in our closed door arrangement, like my mom and dad explained to me. And yet at the same time, we do not want to let our family structure, because the guilt of some true family planning, when the power of sexuality gets away from our young people who were sexually active but had no plans on starting a family. The Republicans need to be called on the carpet in this. The Democrats need to be talking as well, is what are we going to do to get back to a family structure? The family structure of the past that David has said here, the trends are irreversible. Well, if they are, David Brooks, we are in one heck of a mess. And I'm saying, unless we start electing true leaders, Rex Tillerson, some alternatives to these extremists that we have running in the Republican Party, or the fact that people believe that we can just get a guy or a gal in office that follows our direction. That's baloney. We have to get people in place that are true leaders, that are flexible enough, that are powerful enough to say people what is wrong with society and starting addressing it. And when we get in future programs here at Inform TV of talking about modernizing our government, we have to restructure the bodies of how our government works. A 2-year House term, people, has led to no leadership whatsoever, and we're in a society where we're just wondering what to do. But in closing, we'll watch for a redistricting program, and at the same time get to that Cenex station in Alexandria, Minnesota. Come off of that Freeway 94, fill up your vehicle at Cenex here in Alexandria, and look at that pipeline. Because with high-priced gasoline being led by speculators, we need to see that these pipelines are put in the ground, and put in the ground this summer. This ridiculous position the Democrats are taking must be addressed in our conventions, both the Republican convention, the Democratic convention, the Independence Party. We need energy, and we need energy security, and we need it now. But we will not have it when we're in a society that pipelines, we have almost 150,000 miles of pipeline in this country, I believe the number is, that is serving us well, and suddenly we have a society that's coming up with these. We can't do that. Look at that piece of pipeline at the Cenex store in Alexandria, Minnesota. Pull off the freeway, drive to Alexandria some night for dinner, and come into the area and take a look at that pipeline, because we're truly in an era where individualism needs to be throttled back, unless those individuals are a person like a Rex Tillerson, chairman of ExxonMobil, that knows the world and has the capability and the experience to lead, not these extremists on the far right and the far left that are pulling society apart and empowering individuals in too powerful a way. Thanks for listening to Inform TV. I'm Alan Repke, Alexandria, Minnesota.